I'm sorry for being a bit late. This is my pleasure to introduce to you the next speaker, and this is Dr. Eugene Zaitsev, who is the BRI director of the Euro-Asian division filial. And actually, Dr. Zaitsev served our church in many different capacities, and he's a good friend of mine. And this is my pleasure to introduce him. And his topic is conversion in Orthodox religious cultural context. And I just want to encourage you to ask questions after that. But please remember that our time is very, very short.
Dear colleagues, my name is Eugene Zaitsev. I am from Zaoksky Adventist University, and it is a privilege for me to participate in the 5th Theological Seminary Conference in Adventist University of Africa. The topic of my presentation is conversion in the Orthodox religious and cultural context. This topic is extremely important for me in the context of the Adventist Orthodox dialogue. Let me share with you my screen. So I hope you see it. So, conversion in the Orthodox religious and cultural context. The Orthodox Church, which is also called Eastern or Greek, is one of the 3 main branches of Christianity, along with Catholicism and Protestantism. It is, in fact, a group of independent, so-called autocephalous churches located mainly in Eastern Europe, as well as in Middle East. Although these churches are independent, they nonetheless share the same creed and have Eucharistic communion with each other. The Russian Orthodox Church retains the status of the dominant religion in Russia today. According to sociological polls, the number of Russian people who identify themselves as Orthodox is from 75 to 75%. My presentation is devoted to the analysis and evaluation of the discussion that is currently being held among Russian sociologists of religion regarding such concepts as conversion and churching in the Orthodox religious and cultural context. The process of religious conversion came into the focus of attention among Russian researchers relatively recently, in the early 2000s. This was facilitated, first of all, by the social process of the last 2 decades of the 20th century, associated with the revitalization of religion in the Russian social context. Sociological studies of conversion to Orthodoxy are just few. In general, the problem of the conversion of modern Russians to Orthodoxy remains poorly understood, which suggests its further scholarly understanding and expert discussion. And this is actually the statement of the problem. At the same time, certain ideas related to the process of conversion to the Orthodoxy are contained in the works of famous Russian religious thinkers of the end of 19th and the early 20th centuries, as Innokenty Smirnov, Markelin Olesnitsky, Sergei Glagolev, Germagen Szymanski, and others. Analyzing the phenomenon of conversion to Orthodoxy, researchers first of all point out that conversion is the first stage of the Christian life. So according to Innokenty Smirnov, the moral Christian life includes 4 main stages: conversion, strictly speaking, infancy, youth, and maturity. The period of conversion, according to Innokenty Smirnov, in turn includes 3 stages: initial, culminating, and final. The initial stage of conversion implies the presence of difficult life circumstances in a person's life, prompting him or her to seek Christ, as well as negative emotional experiences of the sequences of the consequences of difficult life circumstances. In the second stage of conversion, culminating stage, a person carries out some preliminary knowledge of God, is aware of his or her own weaknesses and desperate situation, admits sins or sincerely repents, condemns himself or herself, desires to return to God. The results of the conversion manifested at the third final stage for a person are the following. At the level of consciousness, the experience of the fullness of spiritual and moral well-being. At the level of social behavior, a radical change in life. Markelin Olesnitsky, considering the structure of the moral Christian life, singles out the stages of revival, conversion, and sanctification, naming them in accordance with the spiritual processes taking place in them. The first stage is characterized by the spiritual rebirth of a person carried out under the influence of divine grace. The main spiritual rebirth is carried out in infancy in the sacrament of baptism. Since it takes place in the unconscious age, it occurs unconsciously and without will. Here it's necessary to take into account the socio-historical context of the time of which Olesnitsky was a contemporary. In the 19th, 20th centuries, Russians, in the vast majority of cases, were baptized in infancy. The spiritual revival of a person that took place in infancy is not limited to the sacrament of baptism. It continues into adult conscious age through the impact on the Orthodox believer of Christian preaching, as well as through the external difficult life circumstances. So according to Olesnitsky, both the main revival, so-called in the sacrament of baptism, and the subsequent revival act as a preparatory stage for conversion. Conversion is the second stage of the moral Christian life, at which an Orthodox Christian consciously and freely confirms or chooses his belonging to the Orthodox Church. The third stage of the moral Christian life, so-called sanctification or renewal, is defined by Olesnitsky as the stage of building a new way of life, corresponding to Orthodox doctrine and Christian moral principles. Markelin Olesnitsky distinguishes three types of conversion to Orthodoxy, depending on at what stage of life a person's conversion followed. The first type of conversion is conversion from childhood. It characterizes the conversion of Orthodox Christians who, having been baptized in the Orthodox Church, lived in accordance with moral ideal which they learned in the process of Christian education. The second type of conversion, according to Olesnitsky, is a conversion in adulthood, which can be divided into two subtypes. The first subtype characterizes the conversion of Orthodox Christians who, having been baptized in childhood, lived more or less for a long time in accordance only with the external Christian requirements of a pious life, assimilated within the framework of family and school education. Until the moment of conversion, they were carried away by worldly concerns and problems and didn't care about achieving the moral Christian ideal. The second subtype of conversion to Orthodoxy in adulthood is inherent in those who were baptized in Orthodoxy from childhood, but upon reaching a conscious age, chose a morally vicious path of life. For this category, conversion represents the determination to morally correct oneself and one's life in accordance with the Christian moral ideal. As Olesnitsky notes, all three categories of Christians must experience conversion. In Sergei Glagolev's discussion of conversion, there is an indication of the three-part process of conversion. the emergence of conditions that actualize for a person the issue of choosing a religious faith, free self-determination of a person to religious faith, and the third, acquisition of religious faith. Sergei Glagolev emphasizes that the conversion of a person can take place only if a person freely determines or chooses religious faith for himself or herself. The researcher considers this self-determination to faith as the first mandatory element of conversion. A person must believe in God and recognize as true the beliefs affirmed by the Orthodox Church. Germagan Szymanski considers conversion as the first stage of moral Christian life, followed by the stages of purification and sanctification. At the same time, the first stage, conversion, strictly speaking, is considered by him as the initial stage of the spiritual growth of a Christian, at which he or she, participating in the sacraments of baptism or repentance, begins to streamline his or her own moral and social life in accordance with the Christian moral model. The second so-called useful stage of spiritual growth of a Christian, or the stage of purification, according to Szymanski, is a period of spiritual and moral self-education or re-education of an Orthodox Christian. The third stage, the stage of sanctification, is the spiritual and moral state of an Orthodox Christian, characterized by deliverance from moral flaws or sins and the achievement of perfection in Christian virtues. In modern Russian scholarly religious discourse, the phenomenon of conversion is an object of interdisciplinary study. The problem of conversion is most actively studied in the sociological aspect. So far, sociological studies of conversion to Orthodoxy, as I mentioned earlier, are few and represented by the works of Liana Ipatova, Valentina Chesnakova, Olga Tupakina, and others. It should be noted that these researchers use various terms to describe the phenomenon of conversion of modern Russians to Orthodoxy, conversion to Orthodoxy, religious conversion, churching, religious choice. All of them are considered mostly as synonyms. Here it is important to pay attention to such concept as churching. The phenomenon of churching is one of those discussed in modern Russian sociological discourse. At the same time, as one of the researchers considers, at the present stage of development of sociological thought, the phenomenon of churching remains practically unexplored. In the sociological discourse, the concept of churching came from church terminology or religious terminology. The Orthodox encyclopedia gives two basic meanings for the concept of churching, from Greek ecclesiasai, to church. First, the process of introducing a person to the Christian tradition and church life. And the second, churching is a specific ceremony performed on the baby and his mother 40 days after his birth. Historically, the concept of churching began to be used in its second meaning as a special church rite from the 4th century, when after the official permission of Christianity in the Roman Empire, the practice of adult baptism gradually gave way to the practice of infant baptism. During this period in the history of the Christian church, a church rite appears for the first joint entry of a Christian mother and her newborn child into a temple after childbirth. The ceremony was carried out on the 40th day after the birth of the child, and was called churching. This Christian rite has been preserved and is used in modern liturgical practice of the Russian Orthodox Church. As an analysis of modern church publications has shown, the concept of churching is increasingly used in them in a new meaning for the Orthodox tradition, in the aspect of religious and church socialization. First, churching is seen as a process of ecclesiastical integration of the individual, integration into the ecclesiastical community. And secondly, churching is seen as a catechization of baptized adult Orthodox believers who, having been baptized, remain uneducated in the Orthodox faith and in the gospel truth. The phenomenon of churching as a process of Orthodox Church integration of a person is the subject of sociological study, as I said. And here is the definition of the concept of churching given by Valentina Chesnokova in the work The Close Way, the process of churching, the population of Russia at the end of the 20th century. One might say the only significant work on the topic of churching in modern Russian sociology. So, according to this author, churching is the voluntary recognition by a person of the influence of the church through the assimilation of the way of life and way of thinking established in it. The assimilation of the way of thinking occurs in parallel and in close connection with the assimilation of the way of life. This latter is precisely the conductor of the stable influence of the church on a person, allowing a person to develop a new attitude toward the world and towards himself over time. End quote. Valentina Chesnokova emphasizes that the study of the Orthodox population is necessary through the study of their way of life. To describe the way of life of an Orthodox Christian, the researcher suggests 5 indicators or variables: frequency of church attendance, frequency of participation in communion, regularity of reading texts of the Holy Scripture, prayer, and fasting. Selected by Chesnokova, these indicators of churching of Orthodox believers made it possible to distinguish the following groups according to the degree of churching, so-called. Group 0, the weakest in terms of churching. That group includes those who has never even risen to the second position on the scale. They don't attend Orthodox church. They don't take communion and never took communion in their life. They didn't and don't read the Bible, don't pray, don't fast. In some sociological research, the percent of people who call themselves Orthodox who don't believe God, 30% of Orthodox people don't believe God, but they can consider themselves as Orthodox because they belong to Russian culture. The second group, Group W, weakly church, include those who won at least one second position but didn't rise higher. Group B, beginners, all those who have reached the third position in at least one variable. Group S, semi-church, those who have risen to the fourth position in at least one variable. And finally, Group C, church or church people, include those who at least once got the fifth highest position on any of the scales. The process of churching has 2 phases, according to Chesnokova, passive and active. The passive phase lasts from the moment of person's baptism. It's a formal change in religious status until the appearance of a cognitive interest in Orthodox dogma and worship. With the appearance of a cognitive interest in the Orthodox religious tradition, the active phase of churching begins, which ends with the acquisition of a place in the church space by the individual, and it means the essential change in religious status. The passive stage of churching is characterized by unconscious, passive, and formal participation in church life. The primary institution of the initial stage of church socialization is the family, and relatives are the primary agents. As secondary institutions of the first stage of the churching, one can name the school and institutions of additional education. Friends, teachers, educators, clergymen act as secondary agents of the churching of youth. In the active phase of churching, the level of religious activity of Orthodox believers, cognitive, liturgical, ascetic, parish, increases. The primary institution of the second stage of church socialization is the church parish, and the primary agents are the priests. Secondary institutions of churching of the second stage are Sunday schools, catechesis courses, Orthodox camps, Orthodox Youth Society, etc. So, how do these two concepts, conversion and churching, relate to each other? In the early works of Liana Ipatova, one comes across an understanding of conversion as one of the stages of the path of churching, of Orthodox believers. The path of churching was considered by the researcher as a sequence of several main stages. First, the gradual maturation of such a life situation that leads a person to faith and to the church. Second, conversion, strictly speaking. Third, socialization or adaptation in the Orthodox community. And the fourth, spiritual growth as a member of the church. However, in subsequent works, Liana Ipatova began to consider churching as one of the stages of the process of conversion, including, first, the gradual maturation of such a life situation that gives rise in a person to the need to convert to faith. Second, the moment of gaining faith. The third, the decision, realization of desire to become a practicing believer of the Russian Orthodox Church. Fourth, the process of socialization in religious Orthodox culture through the development of its values, norms, and practices of behavior. And the final, churching, indicating the completion of the conversion process. Within the framework of this structure of the conversion process, churching is seen as the development of a number of religious practices as a process of socialization in the Orthodox culture. Churching, according to Liana Ipatova, has social and spiritual aspects. They're closely related to each other. The social expression of churching consists in the inclusion in the everyday life of Orthodox believers of religious practices, prayers, fasting, regular participation in worship and sacraments, etc., which are mandatory for the believer from the point of view of Orthodox dogma, as well as belonging to a particular church parish. At the same time, the researcher clarifies that the fulfillment of normative religious practices cannot be used as a reliable criterion of churching in the spiritual sense, since spiritual churching presupposes the conformity of a person's morality, his way of thinking and action to Orthodox ideals. The early understanding of the phenomenon of conversion by Ipatova as one of the stages of the spiritual path of an Orthodox believer is similar to Olga Tupakina, whose works are devoted to the problem of Orthodox Russians' narrativization of their religious experience, the construction of a religious biography, and are largely related to the problem of their conversion to Orthodoxy. Olga Tupakina is inclined to consider conversion as a structural element of the believer's religious history or biography, including as mandatory three elements: conversion, baptism, and churching. It should be noted the significant, from our point of view, theoretical position made by Olga Tupakina. She proposed to consider conversion, baptism, churching, not as successive stages of the religious path, but as its structural elements, the order of which can change in the context of personal biography and determine different types of a person's religious life world. As the researcher points out, every religious biography of an Orthodox believer contains at least one of these elements. If all the elements are present in a religious biography, then, as Olga Tupakina knows, they can be presented in various combinations or chronological sequence. As common in the Russian context of religious biographies, the researcher names combinations in which chronologically baptism is in the first place. Baptism, conversion, churching, or baptism, churching, conversion. At the same time, Tupakina points out that in the case when baptism is the first point of a religious biography, in practice, it may remain its only element, or a baptized person may remain a nominal member of the church for a long time before his real conversion. And only with the beginning of churching, participation in church practices, does he or she become an actual member of the church and acquire a specific identity, church person, or practicing Orthodox. The situation when a baptized person remains a nominal member of the church for a long time, Olga Tupakina calls the situation of postponed searching. So, in a conclusion, we can assume that in the modern conditions of a post-atheistic secular environment characterized by the revitalization of religion and religious pluralism of Russian society, the modern practice of conversion to Orthodoxy may contain various combinations of its structural elements. And the analysis of the research position of such researchers as Liana Ipatova and Olga Tupakina in interpreting the concepts of conversion to Orthodoxy and churching has shown that the definition of the meaning of this phenomena requires additional elaboration. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
The concepts of conversion to Orthodoxy and churching has shown that the definition of the meaning of this phenomena requires additional elaboration. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. And we don't have enough time, but anyway, we can entertain some of the questions. And I see one question that was asked, and I also would like to ask some question about your presentation.
Additional elaboration. So thank you for your attention.
And my question is for this very interesting presentation we have. And we don't have enough time, but anyway, we can entertain. So my question is about churching. The churching is something very unique for the Russian Orthodox Church. About your presentation, what term or what stage of conversion in Western practice or in Western tradition is at least roughly equivalent of churching in the tradition of Russian Orthodox Church? The churching is something very unique for the Russian Orthodox Church. About your presentation, what term or what stage of conversion in Western practice or in Western tradition is at least roughly equivalent of churching in the tradition of Russian Orthodox Church?
Okay, thank you, Felix, for your question.
It's something unique for the Russian Orthodox Church. What term or what stage of conversion Western practice or Western tradition is roughly equivalent of churching in the tradition of Russian Orthodox Church?
Thank you, Felix, for your question. Okay. Yes, the idea of churching is actually unique for the Russian Orthodox Church. And in Western, actually Protestant tradition, the term conversion, baptism, conversion, and churching actually coincide. This is why we don't talk about churching from Protestant perspective. Well, I don't even know what term can be used in Protestant tradition. Actually, Protestant, after baptism, the person become a member of the church. Actually coincide.
Thank you very much. And one more question that I would like to ask. And this is about practical and theoretical level of understanding of the conversion. So you mentioned some scholars, sociologists like Bakina and some others actually conceptualize the conversion
become a member
as a process. Yes. And as far as I know, for the lay church members of the Orthodox Church, they can understand conversion differently. So what is this difference big between the scholarly understanding of conversion and the understanding of conversion by lay people? Actually conceptualize the conversion
become a member
as a process. Yes. And as far as I know, for the lay church members of the Orthodox Church, they can please unmute yourself. Oh. Oh, we cannot hear you. Yes, please.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sure. There is some difference between
please unmute yourself.
scholarly understanding of conversion and understanding of the conversion by lay people. For most of Orthodox people, conversion is actually
yes.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Means
There is
means baptism, and baptism is enough for becoming a member of Orthodox Church. So most of people, Orthodox people, are nominal Christians or formal Christians. Actually, they don't know conversion as internal spiritual experience, and it's actually the sad situation. And baptism is enough for becoming a member of Orthodox Church.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaitsev, for your presentation and for joining us. And now we need to move to the next one. Thank you.
Actually, the conversion is actually don't know conversion as internal spiritual experience. And it's actually the sad situation. And baptism is enough for becoming a member of Orthodox.